that we had in VGC 20. And, he said his goals going into this tournament were just to get some championship points, but he's made it far past that, and now he has a very legitimate shot of getting a back-to-back international title. But Nihal, of course, a very strong player representing the region of Australia, trying to take it home for his home country and continent.
Yeah, and he will have to defeat the defending champion, like you mentioned, to have the opportunity to bring that championship back home to Australia, or else it may be going back to Portugal with Eduardo or to Italy with Marco.
Yeah, and Marco, of course, the #1 seed too, has been on an absolutely dominant tear throughout this course of the entire tournament.
Pretty rare for us to actually see the #1 seed in bracket make it to finals like this.
Yeah, but we are going to get ready for this final semifinals match. Winner of this match will move on, of course, to Championship Sunday to play Marco.
Yeah, Eduardo Cunha versus Nihal Noor. Both of these players have victories so close in their grasp. Like you mentioned, 15 rounds of Pokemon. It all comes down now to this for both of these players. Win this set and you get to compete for the championship title. Eduardo gets to potentially repeat, becoming one of the few people to have repeat international championship titles. Nihal would be competing for his first internationals championship title. But here you can see, had to go through Eduardo first. Top 16 at Worlds last year. Oceania Internationals champion, defending finalist at the Bilbao special event, and top 4 of Worlds in 2016. The Durant and the Gorgeist team. Eduardo knows he's in a good place.
Yeah, and I think when people talk about who the most consistent or best player in the world is, Eduardo is very much up there in that discussion. He has had tremendous performances so consistently. One thing that's not listed there, of course, he was able to top cut that very first regional championship in this format. And to me, actually, I think Eduardo has been one of the players that has really defined this metagame. He's constantly streaming online as well. But, not to take any credit away from Nihal, who, has been more active, especially in past formats. You see, winning regional championships back in 2015 and 2016. And, of course, we have to mention he went 9-0 yesterday. And one thing that viewers might not know is that Nihal actually played Eduardo earlier today, and he was one of the few players that was able to beat Eduardo. So these players have history already, and if there's anyone that can take Eduardo down, it's definitely Nihal.
Yeah, he's already proven it once earlier in Swiss, but now this is the match that matters. It didn't matter that Nihal won in Swiss because they both managed to make it here to the top cut and into the top 4 semi-finalists. Whoever wins this one will actually get to be able to compete for the title of champion. We'll have to see what all that knowledge is going to mean for both of these players, considering they've already played a set. Eduardo knows that Nihal has tools to beat his team with. So this is sort of at minimum, a game 3, our first game.
Yeah, definitely. And there's so much in the dynamic of this matchup as well. Once again, we see some similar things between the two teams. Of course, both teams have Togekiss and Arcanine, but everything else is different. Of course, Nihal with the really cool combination of Gengar and Bisharp, and Eduardo running the Durant and the Gorgeist. And Durant is always a Pokemon I have to wonder if it's going to come out. Eduardo's played it kind of differently than how I typically see players approach Durant. Of course, Gorgeist has had a tremendous performance throughout the course of this tournament. We saw a lot of cool plays that Rogov made in the last round, so excited to see if it comes out in this matchup. Eduardo, of course, does have that Gastrodon as well, which I think will be a really essential Pokemon to check the Rotom Wash on Nihal's end.
Yeah, definitely. We've already seen how important it is to have a Gastrodon to check some of these nasty plot Rotom washes, and even some of the Rotom heats we've seen throughout the tournament as well. We've already seen that Nihal does not have that Dark Pulse on it, so Gastrodon feels pretty safe to stay in against that, so it's a very solid check.
Here we are.
Also add additional power to that Durant.
Definitely, yeah. Going into team preview now, and I think how players will utilize Togekiss is always kind of essential as well. We've seen different Togekiss sets throughout the course, and with no other means of like Tailwind, for example, then Togekiss is a great way to get some speed control just by using max Airstream. Eduardo, of course, however, does have that Trick Room option with Gorgeist, and Gengar theoretically could also run Trick Room. Not very common, but definitely a possibility. So I think if you look at Eduardo's end, I mean, Togekiss can kind of punch holes and do some damage. I think Gastrodon is kind of a Pokemon that I think you are pretty much forced to bring at least to counteract the Rotom. But of course, we haven't seen
it.
Exactly, yeah. We haven't seen how these players played, so they already know the dynamic of this matchup. Perhaps they know, okay, Rotom's not going to ever come out because Rotom is just too big of a, Gastrodon's too big of a check to the Rotom. So Yeah, there's so many things here to consider. I think how the Togekises are trained. You know, Conkeldurr is a great Pokemon to match up against that Tyranitar. We've seen that Eduardo very much likes to Dynamax that Tyranitar and sweep through. And I think like Bisharp is a Pokemon that actually provide a ton of utility for Nihal here, especially in the face of Arcanine. You know, Arcanine's less likely to come out into this matchup, but if it does come out into this matchup, then you can get a big boost off. And we've seen that Nihal is willing to Dynamax with this Bisharp as well and just get really, really big damage across. Of course, the Dynamax Bisharp here will do so much damage to Togekiss, to Tyranitar, to Gourgeist, and if Arcanine switches in, gives it a Defiant boost to that as well. And there it is, coming out as a lead.
There's the Bisharp alongside its own Arcanine to catch the Arcanine and Tyranitar. So Nihal gets the Intimidate off onto Eduardo's Tyranitar and gets the Defiant boost from the Intimidate on Eduardo's side. So that Bisharp is immediately going to be an offensive powerhouse. Net of +1 on that attack.
Definitely. I think being able to, anytime you are able to get a Defiant boost like that, turn one just feels super, super good.
So good.
Yeah, especially because you threaten with like Life Orb Sucker Punch, for example. But I think Eduardo probably went with this lead, saying, okay, even if you go with the Bisharp, well, I threaten your Bisharp with Arcanine, which should outspeed you. It can go for a bunch of different attacks, like a Fire-type attack just to maybe knock you out, or maybe a Will-O-Wisp if it's carrying it. And I actually really like the Tyranitar here as well because it basically covers for Arcanine. It also covers for the potential Togekiss switch in that we've seen players often go for, where you maybe protect your Pokemon, get the free switch into Togekiss, and then try to make some attacks off. But that switch actually isn't very free when there is a Tyranitar out on the field that threatens that. So Nihal's then, of course, does get the Intimidate off against both of these Pokemon, which can provide some utility. Maybe can go for a Will-O-Wisp. But here's the Arcanine switching out, so let's see if it is Togekiss switching in. No, it's Rotom.
Rotom switching in instead of the Arcanine. Tyranitar also switching out. Going to bring in the Gastrodon. Eduardo's seen that switch before. Here comes the Gastrodon to check the Rotom on the switch in. And a Dynamax.
Think, as we've seen throughout the course of this tournament, this is the third time today we've seen a player Dynamax Arcanine. And once again, not a Pokemon you Dynamax very frequently, but specifically makes sense in this situation where you will outspeed the Bisharp.
And need to get rid of it as soon as possible.
Huge max flare, yeah.
One Protect coming out from Bisharp, not going to be able to protect itself fully from an incoming max flare from Arcanine. So we'll be able to deal some good damage through the Protect. 50 hit points there, about a third of that Bisharp's health. Just gone from the max flare. So now Gastrodon and Dynamaxed Arcanine are paired up alongside Rotom and Bisharp.
So right now, Bisharp very much does not want to stay in, does not want to just take another max flare. It's protected as well, so you either sacrifice it, or I think what's a relatively safe play is you go switch into that Arcanine. But then you still have Arcanine and Rotom out. But we've seen, of course, Nihal does have the, you know, a bunch of different plays. He can go for like the Nasty Plot with his Rotom, and if he wants to be really cheeky, he can actually go for that Ally Switch, maybe even Dynamax Bisharp and go for something like a Max Darkness, but I think that's a little bit too risky. I think, but then the question is, really, how are you distributing damage right now? Maybe it's you get a Nasty Plot off and Dynamax the Rotom. He's actually going to stay in. Oh, just goes for a Sucker Punch.
Just taking a Sucker Punch on Gastrodon. Look at all that damage. Max flare onto the Rotom. Eduardo trying to call an Ally Switch. Actually still deals pretty good damage thanks to the Sun. But Rotom is going to be able to get off a Nasty Plot here, boost its special attack, and start threatening damage. Gastrodon's Earth Power covers the Ally Switch there just in case and picks up the KO. Eduardo playing so smartly against the Ally Switch to make sure that no matter what happened, he was going to knock out that Bisharp.
Yeah, exactly. The beautiful thing about that is if you, by not Ally Switching here, it actually works out even better. Exactly, yeah, because you get that extra damage onto the Rotom. So the big question here is, that was a lot of damage from that Sucker Punch, but Gastrodon, if it carries Recover, can just heal that all the way back up. And then my question is, can Rotom and Arcanine do enough to this Gastrodon? If not, this really, like, this matchup feels so good for Gastrodon. And if you're able to knock out Bisharp, which I think is one of the main Pokemon that deals damage, like, Rotom and Arcanine really can't do very much against it. Sure, Rotom can Nasty Plot all it wants, but we've seen this moveset doesn't have Dark Pulse, so literally cannot touch Gastrodon. So it's a great position for Gastrodon potentially to go for Recover if it's running it. And Arcanine, of course, can just do some damage with Max Flare. That damage against the Rotom certainly still not an insignificant amount. Looks like we are going to see a Dynamax, but once again, Dynamax Rotom won't be able to touch Gastrodon. Yeah,
Dynamax Rotom would be stuck using Thunderbolts into Arcanine. Arcanine having one more turn left of Dynamax is pretty big. Can get off a Max Darkness here to soften up the Rotom and the Arcanine with those special defense drops. Here comes the Max Darkness from Arcanine. Is going to connect with the now Dynamax Rotom, trying to get some damage on that Pokemon because Gastrodon doesn't take damage from the Rotom. It also doesn't really deal much damage back to the Rotom. So now with the special defense drop onto Arcanine, hoping to be able to pick up some KOs with that Gastrodon maybe a little bit later, while Rotom heals up with that Citrus Berry. And the Snarl comes out to limit the offensive prowess of these two heavyweights of offensive power, Arcanine and Gastrodon. Max Lightning, of course, with that nasty pop boost, can be dealing a good amount of damage to Arcanine, but the bulk of that Pokemon plus the Dynamax allowing it to survive pretty easily.
Yeah, so one really cool thing that you pointed out was the Max Darkness coming out from Arcanine. So we know this is a support-oriented Arcanine with, using Snarl, and yeah, that special defense drop is huge, and the recover, as we were talking about, I think is so big here because Rotom just really cannot do a single thing to it. Now, Nihal, of course, does have the Dynamax advantage, so it's still anybody's game, but this Gastrodon looks like it's in a really good position right now, but you can also see the how good Snarl is. Both of these Arcanines are carrying Snarl, makes the damage output significantly reduced, obviously, from both ends. So I think maybe content to just click Snarl once again here. This might be a Togekiss switch. It was actually Conkeldurr, which is interesting. Now that is one way to do some more damage to the Gastrodon. Otherwise, nothing else is really hitting it at all.
Okay, and Gastrodon actually going to switch out for Tyranitar. Oh, you hate to switch into a Conkeldurr when you're a Tyranitar here. But both of those switches there, Nihal getting a little bit more of an advantage out of that, while Eduardo just protects the Arcanine here to stave it off any additional damage from the Rotom. Max Lightning onto Arcanine through the Protect, still going to deal just a little bit of damage, thanks to both, Eduardo's doing a really good job to limit the amount of damage that this Rotom can put out, both by including the Gastrodon to block the Max Geyser, Dynamaxing the Arcanine to protect, so that it soaks up a lot of that damage, and now protecting to cut the damage from the Max Lightning.
Yeah, I think Eduardo recognizes Gastrodon is the win condition. You also don't want to eat up too many special attack drops through Snarl. You're not going to be doing too much damage, so it tries to make a proactive switch by going to Tyranitar. But excellent switching into Conkeldurr for Nihal, so that puts on full pressure right now against this Tyranitar. But Eduardo is slowly stalling out the Dynamax, and the Max Lightning actually correctly goes into the Tyranitar slot.
Yeah, it gets the Tyranitar for big damage there. Tyranitar follows up with a Rock Slide, still faster than the Conkeldurr, deals a little bit of damage to both Pokemon, but Conkeldurr able to fire off a Drain Punch, catches the Gastrodon on the switch in. Didn't deal a whole lot of damage though. Arcanine's still in the back and still able to intimidate that Conkeldurr, maybe able to allow that Gastrodon to still have opportunities to keep recovering up.
Yeah, so Eduardo did take a lot of damage there, and I do think your approach towards this game is probably conserving it for as long as possible, but Tyranitar actually managed just to survive the turn despite going up against the Conkeldurr, and like you mentioned, you could pretty safely switch Tyranitar out into Arcanine and then go click Recover, but of course this Rotom is nasty plotted. You could pretty easily just Thunderbolt the Tyranitar slot, and then of course if you and then you can just go for something like a Drain Punch into Gastrodon. So yeah, Arcanine here will probably be able to get an Intimidate, allow Gastrodon to survive, and the main question here once again is how do you distribute damage outside of Gastrodon right now, because Tyranitar and Arcanine really aren't doing too much. So the question I have is what is Eduardo's last Pokemon? Something like Togekiss, for example, could put in a lot of work.
Yeah, we've seen Togekiss, especially the offensive varieties, just running rampant over some of these teams in the tournament. Always a nice last Pokemon. It's weird because you consider having it just as a supporter. The Mach Punch just going to go ahead and pick up the KO onto Tyranitar, so Eduardo's not going to be able to get off an attack here because of the Protect on Gastrodon. Nihal's Rotom also not getting to do much of anything because of the Protect and also the immunity to that Thunderbolt.
Yeah, so Nihal kind of making an aggressive read there, saying Gastrodon is not going to attack here, and so I am just going to double up basically into that slot. The Thunderbolt covers for any switch-ins in the back as well, ends up calling it correctly there. And so now what this at least allows Eduardo to do is get a free switch into the Arcanine as opposed to just switching in and getting it KO'd, because now with it being out, you can go for something like a Snarl or go for an attack as well. So I like that switching. Tyranitar isn't really providing much utility at this point, especially because Conkeldurr threatens it with Mach Punch at any point. So once again, I mean, maybe going for a Recover here would be absolutely huge with Gastrodon. If it's able to survive a fighting type attack, Gastrodon can heal all the way back up and can potentially 3v1 against Nihal at this point.
Okay, well, Rotom is going to switch out for the Arcanine on Nihal's side. So we see that Arcanine is still fully healthy, just going to take a little bit of damage from this Flamethrower on Eduardo's side. Kelder still faster, gets the Drain Punch, goes for the Arcanine, picks up the KO on Eduardo's side. So Arcanine is down, no more Snarls, no more Intimidate. Nihal has the opportunity to reset that Conkelder's attack. Gastrodon not going for a recover, just going for damage, catches the Arcanine with that Scald.
There's a lot of damage there. Yeah, kind of surprised not to see a recover there, but perhaps Eduardo confident in Gastrodon's ability to survive past another couple of turns. So, I mean, it really comes down to what is the last Pokemon right now.
We finally get to see it really, everything really hanging on what Eduardo brought in the back. That Togekiss, maybe that Durant?
I think Togekiss is definitely what it feels like he's been playing towards, and there it is.
Yep.
Yeah, so that makes so much sense here. You get this offensive Togekiss, and I really like the decision to get that damage onto Arcanine as well. So, I mean, Arcanine probably won't be able to knock out the Gastrodon. It can go for a Snarl, but Kelder, still is still relatively healthy as well. So even I don't think a critical hit Dazzling Gleam will be able to get the knockout. So it's kind of why I was surprised to see Gastrodon not recover last turn. In this position, I mean, Togekiss could go for something like a Follow Me, and Kelder is actually going to switch out now. So this does give the opportunity for Gastrodon to maybe get a recover off.
Yeah, Nihal is prioritizing fixing that Conkelder's attack, but in doing so, misses the Snarl on Gastrodon, catches the Snarl on Togekiss. So if Togekiss is not able to land critical hits, it will be reduced attack. No critical hits there, not very effective damage on the Rotom on the switch-in, but Eduardo is going to be able to get off a free recover here because of the dodge on the Snarl.
Yeah, so Rotom does come out now. You do pressure the Togekiss with like a Thunderbolt and a Fire type attack from Arcanine. I'm wondering if that double up will be enough to knock out. So he actually decides to pull out the switch, does not want to risk a potential Follow Me from that Togekiss. Also doesn't want to get avoid getting flinched by an Air Slash. I think if Air Slash gets the flinch there, you're in a really terrible position, especially if it gets that critical hit as well. So I kind of expect a Snarl and Nasty Plot or Thunderbolt into the Togekiss now.
All right, another Snarl. This time lands on the Gastrodon and Togekiss both. So both Pokemon taking the special defense drop. Thunderbolt, not a Nasty Plot, just damage onto Togekiss. It gets good damage, but not enough to pick up the KO. Here comes the Dazzling Gleam from Togekiss. Not enough to pick up the KO on either Pokemon. No critical hits coming out from that Togekiss. Scald is enough to pick up the KO on Rotom.
Yeah, so deciding to just go for Thunderbolt, the Nasty Plot play potentially covers for a Protect, but just playing it safe there, going for damage across the board. And once again, the question is, are you able to knock out this Gastrodon? Now, of course, Conkelder, no stat decreases. Togekiss does threaten still with the critical hit Dazzling Gleam, and it's going to be a close finish. I feel like this position favors the Gastrodon a little bit. I mean, it also comes down to, like, are you able to land a critical hit onto the Conkelder? You could go for something like a Dazzling Gleam and an Earth Power onto the Arcanine, but of course Arcanine here could choose to maybe go for a Protect to just not take any damage, whereas Conkelder can go for something like a super effective attack to knock out the Togekiss. And then you, instead of going for the Dazzling Gleam, maybe you just go for Air Slash and try to go for a flinch. So a lot of options from both players, and there's no Protect, it's just a Snarl from Arcanine.
Yeah, more Snarls from Arcanine. Now, 3 levels of special attack drops on Togekiss. Not going to deal any damage without critical hits here. Gastrodon just taking a little bit. Air Slash connects this time onto Conkelder. No critical hit. A little bit of damage.
No
doesn't get the
either.
flinch.
Wow.
Conkelder just going to get the Ice Punch all the way through. Connects with Togekiss. Picks up that KO. And Gastrodon has been known to bring things back from the brink, but it's got a long way to go, and those Snarls are not helping.
Yeah, so Eduardo there going for either critical hit or a flinch. I mean, ideally both, right? But doesn't get either there, actually. So this Togekiss has not been able to get any single critical hits, despite it being the Scope Lens and Super Luck set. So it's going to be tough for Gastrodon to pull this off now, because Arcanine can just keep clicking Snarl. You have to probably knock out the Arcanine, but then it's Conkelder versus Gastrodon. You can't even really Scald the Conkelder, because if you get a burn, that could activate the potential Guts. So then you're stuck Earth Powering, but Conkelder's just healing back with Drain Punch every turn.
Arcanine protects this turn. Nihal going to make sure that Arcanine doesn't get a free KO, while Gastrodon also protecting. So just going to sort of wait it out, see what Nihal wants to do in this situation, get some more information before going on to the second game.
Yeah, that's a good Protect on both ends. You know, the Protect on Arcanine baits out a potential Earth Power into that slot, and Eduardo tries to bait out the opposing Protect. So now Gastrodon should probably target the Arcanine slot as it goes for Snarl. The thing is that Gastrodon's just special attack is lowered by so much, and like Drain Punch is adding up as well, and I'm just not sure you do enough really to close out this. I don't think Gastrodon can pull this off, and that's so much damage.
That's
from
a
Drain
lot
Punch.
of damage. That's a lot of damage coming out from the Conkeldurr. Gastrodon forced to recover because of it, but just not going to be able to keep up with the damage that Conkeldurr is putting out. Conkeldurr able to stay one step ahead of the Gastrodon. Eduardo's going to have to make some adjustments going into game 2.
Yeah, and I think it kind of starts with the lead here. Ultimately, we saw that I think it felt like Nihal got a little bit more out of his Dynamax as opposed to Eduardo, basically. You know, Dynamax seeing the Arcanine was kind of a cool play. Actually put on a lot of pressure. But the Rotom actually, after getting that nasty plot off, despite being pressured by Gastrodon, was still able to distribute a lot of damage with Max Lightning. And ultimately, I think one of the big things about this game was the fact that Conkeldurr was able to be switched in on the turn Tyranitar came in, putting on so much pressure.
Yeah, that was just a huge momentum swing to have Conkeldurr on the field against Tyranitar in that moment. Right now, Eduardo just sort of stalling out here, continuing to get some good turns of recover, managed to get the Gastrodon all the way back up to basically full health. Maybe trying to potentially play for a timer victory at the end of this?
Yeah, I guess it's actually not necessarily over here. I mean, Gastrodon won't be doing very much damage, but it can alternate between recover and protect. So, I mean, Arcanine is actually going to go for the Will-O-Wisp, and I think that's a great call on Nihal just to add that residual damage every turn. I think at this point, Eduardo's pretty much trying to stall out the PP of Drain Punch, so then once you do, you're not doing, you know, as much damage. But I really, really like the Will-O-Wisp play there. At this point, you don't really need to reduce the damage output from Gastrodon.
Yeah, and we saw the damage that Conkeldurr was able to put out with that Drain Punch. Eduardo now, because of the burn, not going to be able to even hope to go on the offensive because 2 Drain Punch is just going to pick up the KO, so has to rely on the recover to stall out that PP.
Yeah, and, you know, of course, players might be wondering why not just forfeit the game. Well, by doing this, it gives you a little bit more game time to think of a potential game plan for that second game, you know, especially when you're down on the first one. So going for the self-Will-O-Wisp. I love that play from Nihal to activate that Guts. We're going to see Ice Punch here instead of Drain Punch. Let's see how much Ice. Wow, that's still a lot of damage.
Yeah, still basically the same amount of damage Guts boosted that we saw from the Drain Punch.
That was so
Guts
sick.
Boosted. So Eduardo forces Nihal to show the fact that this Conkeldurr is the Guts version, gets the Will-O-Wisp so that it can actually break through Gastrodon's recover and protect wall here, and that should be game.
Yeah, one of the main things that I think Nihal did really well in this game was he realized, okay, if I need to beat this Gastrodon, I have to conserve my Conkeldurr because Togekiss, Arcanine, Rotom, none of those are really beating it, but played really well to put himself in an endgame where this is the dream endgame against Gastrodon. You have a burnt Conkeldurr, and you're just consistently doing damage, and Gastrodon is at, like, so many decreased stages of special attack. So well managed there. I think we saw some really cool plays from both ends here. I think, like, Eduardo's decision to Dynamax the Arcanine made a lot of sense given the context, and yeah, we'll fail that double protect and Drain Punch here. We'll seal the first game for Nihal.
All right, Nihal takes the first game here, sets himself with an early advantage heading into a game 2. Eduardo, if he hopes to defend his International Championships title here, needs to come back in this second game and force the third. Otherwise, Nihal will be advancing into the finals to represent the home country, the host country of Australia here in the finals.
Yeah, to me, in terms of adjustments, it kind of goes back to turn 1, or I guess turn 0 in team preview, where Eduardo, I think, might have felt compelled to Dynamax the Arcanine specifically to counter a potential Bisharp Dynamax because he gave it the boost immediately through Defiance. So maybe Eduardo this time around considers not leading the Arcanine in order to, you know, play a little bit safer around the Bisharp. Of course, Nihal could capitalize off that, saying, okay, this time around, you're not going to lead the Arcanine, so I'm not going to lead the Bisharp. But I think Eduardo saw some, you know, key things in that matchup where it's like, you saw how well he was trying to play around that Gastrodon, but in order to win with Gastrodon, you basically effectively have to knock out the Conkeldurr. So something like could have a great chance of knocking out Conkeldurr is a Dynamax Togekiss, for example. So I think you need to bring a little bit more offense to pressure Conkeldurr. Tyranitar, I think, still is a good Pokemon in this matchup because of how it matches up against, you know, Togekiss, the Rotom, the Arcanine, even Gengar if it comes out. So I think the Pokemon choices were fine. I feel like Durant has kind of an awkward spot in this matchup where we don't know its full moveset. I mean, often, like, there's so many moves you want to run on Durant. I'm curious if it has a way to really get, like, big one-hit KOs, especially on something like that Rotom, which, like we saw, is a good candidate to Dynamax despite Gastrodon being out here. So for Nihal, once again, it's like, how do you put yourself in a position where you have an endgame where you can beat the Gastrodon? For Eduardo, it's can you create an endgame where you knock out the main threats to Gastrodon and then win with Gastrodon against, you know, combination of, like, Rotom and Arcanine. And you know, the fact there's Snarl on Arcanine Nihal's then makes it tougher, I think, for Eduardo, because Gastrodon just doesn't really do any damage.
Yeah, especially, like, even after a single Snarl, Gastrodon just starts limply earth powering away at things or scalding. And even now, Scald is not a safe move to choose now that we've seen Nihal reveal the Guts Conkeldurr on this team.
Right. And I have to wonder, you know, if you're expecting the same lead from Nihal in that last game with that Bisharp, really, what do you lead to counter the Bisharp? I think Durant is actually a potential option where, of course, it can just Dynamax and go for some really strong Max Quakes. And I think the one thing that, you know, Durant might be scared of is you don't want to come out and like face off Dynamax Rotom like and just Max Lightning, especially if you don't have a way to get the one-hit KO. So
yeah.
That might be why Eduardo's a little bit more hesitant to bring it, but I think there's certainly some room for it to come out. I think Gorga is probably pretty tough to come out into this matchup, you know, when you're going up against Bisharp, against potential Gengar. Togekiss, of course, does so much damage against it as well, but Eduardo could consider it, and Gengar actually comes out for Nihal's end.
Yeah, we're going to see Gengar in the
Durant!
second. Whoa.
Well, I love the adjustments from both ends here.
Gengar and Durant on the field. Durant, though, will take the Intimidate from Arcanine. Is paired alongside the Gastrodon just in case the Rotom showed up, but Gengar and Durant on the field. These were, you know, when Sword and Shield first started, I would not have guessed this.
Oh, definitely not. And this is a really interesting dynamic, right? Because the Intimidate is really big against the Durant. And of course, now Gastrodon is actually probably in a better position to Dynamax. One thing that Nihal could consider is actually just Dynamaxing the Arcanine if you're expecting Durant to Dynamax and try to snipe it with like a Max Flare. I think that surely will survive like a Max Quake from -1 Durant right now. So Durant actually puts on a lot of offensive pressure against both Pokemon. I think like the question is then, do you Dynamax it? It's so risky to Dynamax a Durant in front of Arcanine Gengar, but if you're not Dynamaxing it, then what are your plays? I guess it's to maybe protect here or switch out. And yeah, there's the switch, just as you said. So Tyranitar is going to be able to break the Focus Sash here, which is most commonly the item, and on Gengar, and also does so much damage against both of these.
Yeah, this is a great matchup for Tyranitar to have the Arcanine and a Gengar in. Nihal will not allow that, though. Just catches the Tyranitar on the switch and again with Conkeldurr. So Nihal is making great use of his information, knows that Eduardo is trying to get that Tyranitar in, switching in the Conkeldurr to block it. Here comes the Earth Power onto Gengar, does bring it down to its Focus Sash, but because of the sand, will be able to get that knockout, which means that Nihal has a free switch in here. Potentially that Arcanine again, just to get another Intimidate off onto this Tyranitar.
That was a neat play from both ends there. I think Nihal kind of calling that, hey, Durant isn't that big of a threat. I think you're probably going to switch it out. Once again, gets Conkeldurr in as the Tyranitar comes in. Here's Bisharp now, so a lot of offensive presence right now, and Eduardo deciding not to go for the Dynamax there. So, you know, would have been able to take that Shadow Ball a little bit better, but I think one reason why you might not consider Dynamaxing is, one, you have Durant, so you might want to conserve that for a late game Dynamax, and two, you really don't want to like Max Quake into a potential Togekiss switch in.
Yeah, or even the Rotom Wash in the back.
Exactly.
There's plenty of opportunities for Nihal to find free switches or safe-ish switches for that Dynamax Durant. Eduardo probably choosing just to find a little bit more information about this team before going on the offensive with that Pokemon. But here is going to be our first Dynamax of Game 2. It is the Bisharp again. Nihal really prioritizing the Dynamax on that Bisharp.
Yeah, and changing it up a little bit, but I think a great Pokemon to Dynamax in this position, able to do a lot of damage, and still no Dynamax from Eduardo's end. You can see, I think, probably trying to stall out the Dynamax from Nihal's end and then try to maybe sweep, especially with that Durant in the back. And Mach Punch and a Tyranitar does so much damage.
Not quite enough to pick up the KO from full health, but deals so much damage. Activates the weakness policy here. Gastrodon protects this time around. Here comes the Steel Spike from Bisharp. Nihal correctly predicting that. Picks up the KO onto Tyranitar. That's free defense boost on Nihal's side, which is going to be a major player once this Durant comes back out.
Yeah, that's a super nice play. And so I think the tough thing about having Durant in the late game here is that you haven't knocked out the Arcanine, and Nihal made that great switch out turn one, saying, I'm going to conserve this Arcanine specifically for Durant, which you're probably going to switch out. So it comes out here, but Nihal can just Psycho and Intimidate later on. You can, for example, switch out the Conkeldurr into Arcanine. One thing I'm curious about is I don't really know, you know, this Bisharp does not look very invested.
Yeah.
If Durant has a way to hit the Bisharp for super effective, obviously often carries like Stomping Tantrum, but even sometimes a fighting type attack, could still knock out the Bisharp even through Intimidate. So we'll have to see just how much work Durant can put in. This feels like a time where maybe you'll want to consider Dynamaxing, and if it does, then it'll be able to do so much damage. And here's the Dynamax.
Durant going to Dynamax now in the face of the Conkeldurr, and the Bisharp adds a little bit of survivability in addition to turning all of its attacks into max moves, which crucially means that Durant's hustle ability is not going to drop their accuracy. Still get the boost, still get the attack boost, but you don't have to worry about the accuracy anymore. Bisharp goes for a max guard, afraid of damage coming out from Durant, but that's just a steel spike into Conkeldurr. Big damage, not quite enough to pick up the KO, but with a double target that just might be enough, and defense boosts onto that Gastrodon. Drain Punch from Conkeldurr connects with Durant, does a little bit of damage, will be able to heal up from the Drain Punch recovery. Earth Power from Gastrodon connects onto Conkeldurr, deals damage, no Snarl, not quite enough to pick up the KO, but wait, Tyranitar didn't get to deal much damage on its own, but the sand coming up big.
Yeah, nice play there by Eduardo, reading super heavily into the Protect on Bisharp and calls it perfectly. That play makes a lot of sense too. You cover a potential Arcanine switch, and if Arcanine switches in, yeah, Max Steel Spike doesn't do much damage, but you get that defense boost, and Bisharp probably isn't going to be able to knock you out. And then the Gastrodon's able to Earth Power. So I really, really like that play from Eduardo, and works out even better because Bisharp ended up going for Max Guard, so it doesn't get anything off there.
And here are the final two Pokemon for Nihal. It's the Arcanine and the Bisharp, which means that if Durant is packing the ability to fire off Max Quakes, that'll hit for super effective damage on both of these Pokemon, and there's nothing Nihal can do about it except for trying for more protects.
Yeah, Gastrodon in a great position right now against the Bisharp and the Arcanine. This is what I was
It's
talking about.
soaking in buffs.
Exactly, and that single defense boost actually makes such a big difference against this Bisharp specifically. I'm not even sure like a Max Darkness and a Fire type attack from Arcanine will knock out Gastrodon, and I thought Gastrodon was so good for Eduardo earlier, and he's been able to put himself in a great position where now it just can maybe close out the game, and you still have to deal with Durant doing damage. Let's see if Max Quick gets this knockout. It does! It is so strong. Don't doubt the ants. Intimidate,
Still damage.
Oh man, so well played by Eduardo, despite leading a Durant into Arcanine, still able to really pull this one out. Max Darkness will come out, but this probably won't get the KO onto the Gastrodon. Let's see.
Yeah, the defense boost is so big on Gastrodon. It hangs on with just 15 hit points left. Removes the special defense boost from the Max Quake, but Gastrodon doesn't mind. It's just all about that Max Steel Spike defense boost here as it recovers up and gets ready to wall Nihal, and this Durant and Gastrodon are ready to force a Game 3.
Wow, I love the adjustments here, and Nihal made some cool adjustments with the Gengar and the Arcanine lead as well, but I think you have to go back to the drawing board and look at how much utility you got out of a Gengar. What did Gengar do this game? They got a single Shadow Ball off and straight up getting knocked out.
Yeah.
So I'll see
it dealt like 60% damage to the Gastrodon.
Okay. But at the end, Durant just did so much work in this game, right? Able to give the Gastrodon the defense boost, able to just cleanly one-hit KO Arcanine despite the Intimidate, and then of course get the knockout. Yeah, he got 2.5 knockouts basically, and really like the adjustments on Eduardo's end. So I think for Nihal, you have to go back to the drawing board and look at, okay, how do I actually beat this Durant? Because solely having Arcanine is not enough. You have to consider then what the Pokemon you want to Dynamax is. I think like Bisharp was cool to Dynamax earlier on, but it doesn't do anything against Durant. Durant's faster, it threatens with Max Quake, and even go for a Max Steel Spike to get that defense boost, so Bisharp really doesn't do very much damage to it. So then I look at what Nihal has, and it actually goes back to that Rotom Wash, which he actually opted not to bring, because Rotom Wash, of course, can go for a nasty plot, can Dynamax, and then Max Lightning should just be able to knock out the Durant. So I think that might be the adjustment to consider, especially if Durant does not have the Max Flutterby or a Bug type attack to hit the Rotom. A lot of Durants often don't carry that, but of course, it's kind of hard to go for that gamble if you don't know the moveset. We don't know the moveset, so that is one of the biggest questions I have.
Yeah, and really strong play there from Eduardo, of course. Showed the Durant in the first turn, immediately realized that that was not the position that Durant needed to be in to successfully sweep, to pick up the 3 KOs that Durant needs to do when it Dynamaxes. It needs to pick up those KOs. It needs to start spreading those buffs to its partner Pokemon.
Yeah.
Realized it wasn't going to have that opportunity turn 1, switched it back out, and just waited until the right moment to bring it back in.
Oh my goodness, what a fun set, and then you really couldn't ask for a better Game 3 between such amazing players. We've seen adjustments throughout the course. We've seen different Dynamax Pokemon. In fact, it's actually been 4 different Pokemon that have Dynamax so far, so let's see if we can make it 6 in this Game 3.
Here we go into Game 3. Tournament lives on the line for both players. This is a knockout match. Eduardo, of course, We've already seen the Durant in this last matchup. It had a poor leading, but was able to come back in and sweep entirely. The Rotom Wash, something we didn't see in Game 2, but was so strong for Nihal in Game 1. Have to imagine that these players are going to be thinking about that.
Yeah, and I think like Eduardo's always bringing Gastron to this matchup. I think that last game actually really highlighted the value of Gastron. Like, Nihal has 3 Pokemon that are weak to Earth Power, right? And it just does so much damage, especially when you combo it with that Sand from Tyranitar, effectively able to get like a knockout onto Gengar, into Arcanine, or into Bisharp, and it does so much damage against Arcanine as well. So I think Eduardo's always bringing Gastron. The question is, how do you support it? If you do expect Nihal to go back into Rotom Wash and maybe play around a Rotom Wash-oriented game, then you have to look at, you know, what counters Rotom Wash outside of Gastron as well. And if Durant doesn't have like a bug type attack to hit it for a lot of damage, then that could be problematic. So then, you know, I look at Gourgeist, but it just feels so tough to bring Gourgeist into a matchup with Togekiss and Bisharp.
And Gengar.
And Gengar, yeah, exactly. So I think like Eduardo could be content going with the same Pokemon. Maybe you don't need Durant this time around. Keep it in the back. Try to bait out the Arcanine. The thing is, even if your opponent like doesn't lead Arcanine and you bring Durant, like they can always just switch into Arcanine. Right. So, but I think Eduardo made some cool plays in that last game where he basically baited out Arcanine immediately and then switched out his Durant to get the switch out. And there's Arcanine coming in once again.
Arcanine and Togekiss this time around for Nihal, bringing in the Arcanine and that supporter Togekiss. Durant back out on the field alongside Tyranitar. So very high value Intimidate here coming out from Arcanine. Although, of course, we do know that the Max Quake still KOs through the Intimidate. Harder to do that, though, when there's a Togekiss on the other field.
Yeah, and I think Eduardo bringing the Durant saying, you know, I don't really care about the Intimidate. I know how much damage I do anyway. A single Intimidate isn't going to matter, especially after I Dynamax. But this time, Tyranitar being out here puts on a lot of pressure against both the Togekiss and the Arcanine. Of course, both of those are weak to Rock's Tide or any, you know, the threat of like Dynamax Rotom does not exist.
Yeah, and the only advantages that Nihal is getting is speed so far on that Togekiss now that Conkeldurr has switched out. Bisharp is going to be the final Pokemon that Nihal has brought to this competition. And we are going to have a Dynamax from Eduardo, so picking one of Gastrodon or Togekiss to Dynamax here, likely just going to try and match the Dynamax from Nihal's side with his own Togekiss, like we see here. Maybe try to catch up an Airstream boost, or just try to go for some big damage.
I think Eduardo's Togekiss can pull this off if you knock out the Bisharp. Now, presumably, Nihal's going to go for a Max Airstream, which is exactly what he goes for, to make sure that your Togekiss and Eduardo's end does not get a speed boost and outspeed this Bisharp. Bisharp is, of course, pretty good answer against this Togekiss. So if Eduardo calls this, though, and gets the knockout on a Bisharp, that could be absolutely huge.
Just going to be the Airstream fired back to try and match speed boost. Deals a lot of good damage, but not quite enough to pick up the knockout there with just the Max Airstream.
Is it a double up,
Gastrodon has a shot, though.
Oh, there's the Scald! Okay, it's going into the Bisharp. Does that do enough damage? Oh, it gets the knockout! That's so huge! That is so huge. Eduardo now has 2 extra turns of Dynamax, and oh my goodness, yeah, I think might have been
2 extra turns of Dynamax. Nihal only has speed boost on the Togekiss, which is about to lose Dynamax, so Arcanine and Conkeldurr in the back here.
Yeah, oh my goodness, that was essential. And I think from Nihal's end, you know, if Eduardo doesn't get that knockout, then you get a free switch it into Bisharp, and then you can go for the Iron Head the following turn. But now there is a Dynamax advantage on Togekiss's end, and so can go for a couple of Max Airstreams. Of course, it has to worry about Snarl from Arcanine, but because Togekiss on Eduardo's end has gotten that Max Airstream boost first, it would actually move before Arcanine Snarl, and of course, it can also just manage to land a critical hit. So, oh my goodness, that was a huge knockout.
Okay, well, Eduardo's going to retweet the retreat the Gastrodon for the Tyranitar, while Togekiss finally starting to get off some damage to both Pokemon.
My
the weakness policy activates from that Dazzling Gleam.
Oh, this is
huge buffs to the attack, while Togekiss just going for a straight Max
smart.
Starfall.
That covers the potential
No Will-O-Wisp.
Oh, that is such a good play by Eduardo. That covers every option
gets the critical hits this time around. Eduardo getting the damage onto the enemy Togekiss. Still has 1 more turn of Dynamax, of course. Nihal used his turns of Dynamax to take out that Durant with those 2 Max Airstreams, but Arcanine now setting up the Snarls on Togekiss, trying to limit the damage output, but that doesn't matter if Togekiss can keep getting those crits. And now that the Tyranitar has has the weakness policy boost and Misty Terrain up. It is angry.
I love that play from Eduardo. You cover so many options. The one way like Nihal can maybe counteract that is if you switch like Arcanine out into Conkeldurr, but that is a really difficult play to make in that position. So Eduardo putting on so much offensive pressure right now, can even give Tyranitar a speed boost by going for another max airstream. And of course Nihal will have that Conkeldurr in the back, so that can put in some late game pressure, but this Togekiss being faster will be able to put on so much damage, and I think you could do something like max airstream into Arcanine and Rock Slide. From Nihal's end, perhaps maybe you contemplate going for a Protect with that Arcanine, stall out this last turn of Dynamax. And then get the free switch in into Conkeldurr, but that was a really, really clever play by Eduardo last turn. I love the fact that he set up Misty Terrain. Even though Arcanine didn't go for the Willows, it covers every option, and it's actually going to be an Arcanine switch out, which could be a little bit risky here.
Yeah, really risky to try to sneak in the Conkeldurr on this turn. Togekiss is still Dynamaxed.
Oh,
Nihal's going to protect.
Don't follow me either.
Don't follow me. It's just like, I think I know where you're going to go with this.
Where's this going? Is this Conkeldurr?
It is the Conkeldurr on the switch in!
That's
a KO! He went for it.
Oh my goodness, yeah, I think you can respect it there. I mean, that feels so risky to me, and I think that will secure Eduardo the game here. Oh my goodness!
What a play there. Nihal trying to go for the read to get the Conkeldurr in safely. Unfortunately, just too afraid of that Tyranitar, felt that he needed to put the offensive pressure of Mach Punch on there immediately. Instead, gets knocked out, has to switch in the Arcanine. Intimidate's going to cut down the attack of Tyranitar a little bit, but the damage is done.
Wow. I mean, outstanding back-to-back plays there by Eduardo, and I think that play was a really safe play as well, right? Like, max airstream guarantees you the speed boost there. It means that you'll be able to outspeed things. Rock Slide covers any switch-ins. There's no reason not to click Rock Slide on Tyranitar. And I do feel like max airstream into Arcanine is the only play that really makes sense there, right? Why would you target Togekiss there? I guess you would maybe target it if you want to get the KO through Protect, but it's not really pressuring you that much at this point. Dazzling Gleam isn't doing that much damage anyway. So, yeah, I think that really should secure Eduardo this game. Conkeldurr was the one thing that was really threatening the Gastron in the back. Togekiss is so low at this point, and
Arcanine can't do anything to it.
Exactly. Oh my god.
That's an Air Slash coming out from Nihal. So there is one option left. Critical hits and flinches from Air Slash. Gets both of them. Here comes the Heat Wave from Arcanine. Will pick up the KO on the Togekiss. Not going to be able to deal enough damage to Tyranitar. And of course, because of the Misty Terrain, no hope for burns there. Rock Slides don't miss. Both of those connect. Double KO. Eduardo is going to take game 3 and advance to the finals.
That was such a fun